Judge's Corner is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the best online retailer for Magic the Gathering singles and sealed product, and GatheringMagic.com, your place to explore the game. Now it's time for Judge's Corner.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching another episode of Judge's Corner. Today we're going to be taking a look at the mechanics for Oath of the Gatewatch. But first, I want to take a look at one of the biggest changes in Magic in a very long time. Wastelands. No, not that wasteland. The Wasteland. A new basic land which taps for colorless mana. Because the land itself is basic, you can play any number of them in your deck in constructed events. But in limited events, you can only play what you receive in your sealed pool, or what you pick in your draft. Wastes don't have a basic land type. What does that mean? Well, when you look at a card Waste, you only see that it has basic land written on it. But when you look at a Forest, you'll see it too has basic land written on it, but it also has Forest right after. The Forest is the type of basic land the forest is. This is the same for island, mountain, plains, and swamp, but not for wastes. So you can still find waste with cards like Evolving Wilds or Cultivate, but it won't count towards Domain or any other effects like that. What I mean by Domain are cards like Allied Strategies or Tribal Flames. These cards give you some kind of bonus for each basic land type you control and play. You may have noticed the diamond symbol on wastes. This diamond symbol is the new representation for colorless mana. Yep, colorless mana now has its own mana symbol. But why include this now? Well, there are new cards from Oath of the Gatewatch that require colorless mana to cast, like Kozilek, the Great Distortion, or cards that require colorless mana to activate abilities, like Endbringer. These new cards require you to pay colorless mana, which is why we have Waste as a new basic land. But what about some of the older cards without the new colorless mana symbol? Do they still produce colorless mana? Of course. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look at the first example to help illustrate that point. How about an older card, Ancient Tomb? The original version of Ancient Tomb from Tempest says, tap, add 2 colorless mana. But then, the From the Vault Realms version of Ancient Tomb shows the number 2 instead of saying 2 colorless mana. This was a more streamlined way of showing that the card produces colorless mana. Well, now we have an even more precise way of showing that Ancient Tomb produces 2 colorless mana. But what about spells that have a number with a gray circle behind it in its mana cost, like on Ugin? Do those cards require that number of colorless mana to cast? Nope. That's because a card like Ugin requires you to spend 8 of any mana, because what that 8 with a gray circle represents is 8 generic mana. Generic mana can be of any color, so you can even use a combination of colors plus colorless mana to produce a total of 8 generic mana to cast Ugin, or as we like to call him, Eugene. So if you're still confused about colorless mana or waste, don't be alarmed. Just leave a comment below and myself or someone else will be happy to get back to you as soon as possible. With that, let's go ahead and move on to the mechanics of Oath of the Gatewatch. Our first mechanic is Cohort. This ability shows you what you can accomplish with teamwork. Each creature with Cohort will have a different ability, so make sure to read them carefully. In order to use Cohort, you need to tap the creature with the ability, and another ally creature you control. The creature with Cohort will need to not be summoning sick in order to be tapped, but the additional ally can be tapped, even if it just came into play under your control. If you tap 2 creatures with Cohort for Cohort, you won't get both effects, just the single designated effect you chose to activate, so no double dipping. Next, we're supporting our allies with the Support mechanic. Support gives a spell the ability to target a number of creatures up to the number you can support, and give each of those creatures a single +1/+1 counter on top of whatever the card does otherwise. For example, if you play a Saddleback Lagok, you can support 0, 1, or 2 creatures, and give those target creatures a +1/+1 counter when its trigger resolves. If you don't have any other creatures, you'll still get whatever else the spell or ability does, which in this case just leaves us with a really big lizard. Keep in mind that if all the targets of your spell become illegal, then the spell is countered by game rules. This only seems to affect Unity of Purpose and Shoulder to Shoulder, in that if all the targeted support creatures are removed before the spell resolves, it won't untap every creature with a +1/+1 counter, or draw a card respectively. However, the other support cards don't have to worry about this, because they're either permanents with an activated or triggered ability, or spells that have other targets, or only support. Also, make sure to read your cards carefully, because you can benefit greatly by following the card's intended purpose. For instance, Unity of Purpose has support written before the rest of the effect. What this means is that you will first give a +1/+1 counter on up to 2 creatures. Then, those 2 creatures that just got +1/+1 counters untap, since the rest of the effect on Unity of Purpose comes after support. Surge is our final mechanic, which allows players to cast spells for an alternate cost if they, or a teammate, have played another spell this turn. It doesn't matter if that spell resolved, was countered, or is still on the stack. So long as they cast it, you're eligible for a discount on your next spell with Surge. And sometimes, it's more than just a discount, as seen on cards like Crush of Tentacles. Worth noting, if you copy a spell that was cast with Surge, like Crush of Tentacles, the copy will also be considered to have had its Surge cost paid, and in this case, it'll produce a token too. Things to know include that you can't combine alternative costs. So, you couldn't give a spell with Surge flashback via Snapcaster Mage, and then expect to cast it for its Surge cost from the graveyard. Also, the mana cost you pay might be less than the original cost, but the converted mana cost remains the same. So, you can still Disdainful Stroke a comparative analysis that was cast via its Surge cost. The last thing you might want clarification on regarding Surge and support is, who are my teammates? Those are anyone on a team with you in a single game of Magic. These teams are established before the game begins, such as with Two-Headed Giant or Emperor variants. They win when you win, and vice versa. People who are working with you but not on your team by the rules of the variant are not your teammates for these mechanics. Sorry, but just because your commander is Felidgriff does not make us teammates. So that's it for our episode. If you have any questions about this episode or any other questions in general, you can always send us an email at judgescorner@gatheringmagic.com, or leave a comment below, and myself or someone else will be happy to get back to you. Until next time, make sure to shuffle thoroughly, play at a reasonable pace, and I hope I didn't waste your time.